Well, as the meme goes, here we go again. KTM has decided that 1301 cc's is simply not enough for their Super Duke. So they're putting a 1390 motor in their bike now? Because that makes a whole lot of sense. It's not like the KTM Super Duke was already an aggressive animal. Why don't you make it more powerful?
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the show. And you heard me correctly, KTM making a 1400cc motorcycle for their V-twin because apparently over in Austria they want to start counting their cc's in cubic inches. So, I mean, that's a gigantic, absolutely gigantic motor to put into a motorcycle. And you know what? I honestly think that we're reaching a stupidity singularity when it comes to the Super Duke. I've ridden a couple, and they're so savage. Why does it need more power, KTM? It's absolutely ridiculous, and we're going to go talk about it. And you may notice that we are out here on the live wire. So this is not quite as torquey, but it's still a naked bike. Whee! So it's been a hot minute since we've done a news story, but let's see if I can remember how I used to do it. And first things first, we've got to start with the facts. And they're pretty light on the ground because we don't actually have a bunch of specs for this motorcycle yet. So a lot of what I'm going to say is going to end up being speculation. But as somebody who does have a lot of experience with the 1290 mil and KTM's generally, I feel like I have a decent amount to say about this. So, the facts as they are. For 2024, KTM is updating their 1290 with a 1390cc motor. So my guess is what they're doing here is they're doing the thing that they always do, where they basically are just like, okay, the block just took 1290 or 1301 cc's. Let's just bump it up to 1401. Because it's not actually going to be 1390 cc's, as I am probably going to stumble my way through a couple of times in this video. It's actually going to be closer to 1400. Because that's just how KTM does it. You know, I kind of appreciate that their engines are as close to big whole round numbers as they can get. So that's basically all we know. You're probably going to see it first in the Super Duke. You might see it in the Super Adventure. But my God, that kind of torque off-road is insane.
Now, I interrupt this tirade about KTM to bring you a public service announcement. If you're like me and you're on a big V-twin, you're going to find yourself ending up at a gas station a lot because you ride like that all the time. And if you're like me, you hate taking your gloves off to fish out your one specific card. Well, thankfully, Exter makes a better solution with their low-profile wallet that actually has a trigger popping your cards out the top so you can easily grab whatever card you need without taking your gloves off. It doesn't just stop there though. They've got all kinds of cool stuff for your everyday carry needs. Click that link down in the description below and use the code SPITE for 25% off your order. Okay, let's get back out there. I need to know exactly why KTM would do such a thing.
You know what? This isn't unprecedented because BMW recently has updated their 1250 to be a 1300 in the GS because, for reasons we're going to get into later, it kind of is the easier option here. So for those of you guys who are a little bit unaware of how KTM's history with the LC8 began, essentially what happened is back in the day, I believe it was a 950. I'll have to do the research on the like super proto LC8 motors. I think they were 950s. because they had that carbureted SMT that like Zach Kortz owns, and then they went up to the 990, which is basically the first iteration of the Super Duke that I'm aware of. It may be older than that, but I basically started following the history at 990. So KTM was like, you know what? The block just took 990 or 1,000 cc's. Why don't we bump it up to 1090? Okay, they did it. They bored it out, and they wanted to see how much the block would take, and it just took it. So they were like, okay, 1,190 cc's. Let's find the upper limit. The block just took it. And then they were like, okay, German engineering, let's see if it can take more power. And it did. It just kept taking more and more power. So KTM was like, okay, there's theoretically no upper limit to what we've built here. Why don't we just keep pushing? And they actually stuck with the 1290 for a while, almost 10 years. They've been running the 1290 motor, which is longer than any other motor in their lineup, I believe. I don't think any other motor, at least in terms of like their street line, has stayed with the same kind of displacement. The 690 got a whole raft of updates in 2019. It basically is an entirely different motor. The 890 and the 790, those got bumps. We're hearing rumblings of a 990 parallel twin. It's just like KTM love adding another number. So I guess what we're seeing here is the logical change, but my guess is it's not actually driven by a desire to test the limits of the block anymore. And this is where we get from news to speculation. Now, for those of you guys who are aware of, motorcycle development, and it's not like I'm an expert here. I'm, Spite, the expert in motorcycle design. No, I just have learned from being around it and talking to people that basically, when we're dealing with these tightening emissions regulations, which we're seeing in Europe, we're seeing here in the States a little bit, we're trying to anyway, the basic way of adjusting to meet emissions with all of the and basically to keep power is to boost your displacement, because more displacement can run at a lower RPM, make the same power, use less gas, and so it meets emissions standards. But it's like, guys, the KTM Super Duke's making 108 foot-pounds of torque, and I think like, oh man, I forget how much horsepower, like 180 horsepower or something like that. So my wondering is, are they looking for more power? And I don't think we're actually going to see a big increase. If anything, we may see an increase in torque, but I doubt we'll see an increase, at least a substantial one, in horsepower, because I think we're seeing just a tightening emissions regulation, and KTM being like, okay, fine, we weren't gonna update this motor because it's so great already. Let's just make the 1390 and call it a day. We'll make it for another 5 or 6 years while emissions regulations continue to tighten. That, or they're just hedging their bets and hoping that emissions regulations don't tighten further. Now, that's all speculation, and I think it's relatively not educated, but perhaps I feel like I'm close on to the money here. Power on this motorcycle, I think it's so silly. I think it's so silly for people to be like, yeah, no, we need, I need more power out of the Super Duke. I want it to be more super. I want it to be the Mega Duke. Have y'all ridden a Super Duke? It's okay. So I'm gonna tell you a quick story here. So, working at Yammy Noob a while back, we did a video with a Super Duke and something else. And the closest I ever got to looping a motorcycle on accident, complete accident, was on a Super Duke. I was just, going down the road. I cracked the throttle open like I would on, pretty much any other motorcycle. And the front wheel just went whee! It completely scared the shit out of me. To the point where, like my fucking legs came off the pegs and I was like, oh my God, stop! Slapped the throttle shut, front end slammed down. Yeah, man. The Duke is an unruly motorcycle, and you need to be a truly capable motorcyclist to handle that bike. And I don't see the point, especially when you look at what KTM says with their sport bikes. Why don't they make a leader bike anymore? Oh, because it's unsafe and it wouldn't be responsible for them to make a sport bike. Okay, sure, but you make a naked bike with like 108 foot-pounds of torque. Is that responsible? KTM just makes no sense to me anymore. It's just like, I don't know what's in the water over in Austria, but they're completely bananas. Don't get me wrong, I'm here for it. I enjoy the motorcycles that they make, but I can't own them because they're too zoinked out. It's like every single one of them is as juiced as it can possibly be. And that's awesome. I love that in the industry. But at a certain point, I'm just like, KTM, go home, man. You're drunk. And it is also worth pointing out that I believe the biggest sport bike engine was the 1441 in the ZX14. We're encroaching on beating out the Busa Killer with a V-twin. That's not a Harley or an Indian or a cruiser, generally. That's nuts. What kind of a world are we living in where, yes, we must have 1401 cc's, which is probably where they're going to be at. KTM is just Looney Tunes, man. And as much as I'm admonishing them here, you know what? Part of me appreciates that there's one company that just will not put down the cocaine spoon. They're just like, they've got a giant pile of it sitting in their engineering warehouse, and guys are just shoveling it up their nose every single day, being like, what more insane thing can we do with motorcycling? I just kind of wish that we weren't in the place where we were in the early 2000s, where it was just about displacement and more power. I wish that they were doing something more inventive, I suppose. But that is going to round out my thoughts on the KTM 1400cc motor. Because, yeah, again, we needed a 1390 out there. We really did. Let me know your thoughts down below. Do you think that increasing engines is the salve to our emissions regulations, or do you think that bikes are kind of just fine where they're at now? Do you think that they should basically just start detuning them a little bit from the factory and letting people, if they want, just flash them back up to where they're supposed to be? That kind of makes more sense to me. Like, just keep the motor under stressed. But that's just me. Let me know in the comments down below. And a huge shout out to the sponsor for today's video, Insta360. Again, if you're wondering how I get these cool 360 shots on my handlebar, it's all down to this camera right here. Click that link down in the description below to check one out for yourself. And I'll catch you guys in the next one. See you later.